A first-class seat. For most, it's a luxury. For Dr. Evelyn Reed, a titan of finance and philanthropy, it was simply her ticket home. But on Prestige Airlines Flight 76 from London to New York, her paid-for confirmed seat 2A became a battleground. She was calmly asked, then told, then ordered to give up her seat for another passenger, a white man who arrived late. The reason? A flimsy, insulting excuse that would unravel into a web of corporate rot and blatant prejudice. What the flight crew and their entitled guest didn't realize was that they hadn't just disrespected a passenger. They had just lit the fuse on a $500 million bomb set to detonate at the heart of their own company. Before we begin, comment where you are watching from today, and make sure to subscribe because tomorrow's story is one you don't want to miss. Now, let's get into it. The scent of warm towels and vintage champagne hung in the rarefied air of the Prestige Airlines first-class cabin. Dr. Evelyn Reed, founder and CEO of the colossal Atherton Foundation, had settled into seat 2A with a quiet sigh of relief. It had been a grueling week of negotiations in London, securing partnerships for global health initiatives. At 48, she wore her success not as a shield, but as a finely tailored suit, impeccable, understated, and powerful. Her charcoal gray business dress was a testament to quiet elegance, her hair pulled back in a neat chignon, revealing diamond studs that were her only jewelry. She was absorbed in a financial report on her tablet, the muted cabin lights glinting off its screen. The boarding process was nearing its end when a shadow fell over her. Evelyn looked up to see a flight attendant, a woman with a starched smile and a name tag that read Karen, standing beside a flustered-looking man in an oversized, rumpled suit. He appeared to be in his late 50s with a ruddy complexion and an air of impatient entitlement. "Excuse me, ma'am," Karen began, her voice a practiced, saccharine melody. "There seems to be a small issue with the seating." Evelyn offered a polite, professional smile. "Oh? I'm sorry to hear that. I'm in 2A. She gestured to her boarding pass, which lay on the small table beside her half-finished glass of water. The man, Arthur Finch, huffed impatiently. "That's my seat. I always sit in 2A. Karen's smile tightened. She looked at Evelyn, her eyes flicking from her dark skin to her simple, though obviously expensive, dress. It was a micro-assessment, a judgment rendered in a fraction of a second. "I understand, ma'am," she said, her tone shifting from helpful to condescending. "But Mr. Finch here is one of our most valued Platinum Elite members. There must have been a system glitch. We have another lovely seat for you in the back of the cabin." Evelyn's smile didn't falter, but a glacial coldness entered her eyes. The Atherton Foundation was Prestige's single largest corporate client, booking hundreds of first-class international flights a year. Her own status was beyond platinum. It was a bespoke, invitation-only tier called Global Chairman. She knew for a fact that Arthur Finch was not seated in 2A. She had selected this specific seat months ago. "I believe you'll find my booking is correct," Evelyn stated calmly, her voice even but firm. "I booked this seat 3 months ago. Perhaps you could check Mr. Finch's boarding pass?" Arthur Finch scoffed, waving his pass dismissively. "My assistant handles it. I'm always in 2A. Just move her," he grumbled, not even deigning to look at Evelyn, addressing Karen as if she were a servant and Evelyn an inconvenient piece of luggage. The flight attendant's practiced composure was beginning to crack, replaced by an obsequious deference to the loud, demanding man. "Ma'am, to avoid delaying the flight for everyone, it would be much simpler if you would just move to seat 8C. It was the just that did it. The casual dismissal of her right to be there, the implication that her presence was the problem, her compliance the solution. Evelyn had faced boardrooms filled with hostile, dismissive men. She had stared down corporate raiders and uncompromising politicians. She would not be moved by a flight attendant and a petulant bully. "No," she said. The word was not loud, but it resonated with absolute finality in the quiet cabin. "I am in my assigned seat. The issue is with Mr. Finch's booking, not my own. I will not be moving." Karen's face flushed with anger. The professional mask slipped completely. "Ma'am," If you refuse to cooperate, I will have to get the cabin supervisor. Please do, Evelyn said, turning her attention back to her tablet, a clear dismissal. A few minutes later, the cabin supervisor, a man named David Chen, arrived. He had a harried look, a man clearly more interested in avoiding confrontation than resolving it. He listened to Karen's whispered, one-sided account, her words painting Evelyn as an uncooperative passenger. He glanced nervously at Arthur Finch, who was now tapping his foot with theatrical impatience. David approached Evelyn, his hands clasped nervously. "Ma'am, I understand there's some confusion. We have a Platinum Elite member who—" "There is no confusion," Evelyn interrupted, her voice cutting through his prevarication. "I am in my paid-for assigned seat. The gentleman is attempting to take it. Your flight attendant is enabling him. You can either find him his correct seat, or you can find him another flight. Those are the options." The supervisor paled. He saw a well-dressed black woman, calm and resolute. He saw a red-faced white man, blustering and demanding, and he made the coward's choice. He chose the path of least immediate resistance. He chose to placate the noise. "Ma'am," David said, his voice dropping, "I'm going to have to ask you to move. We can't have you disrupting the cabin and delaying departure." The accusation was stunning in its injustice. "I am disrupting nothing. I am sitting quietly in my seat. You are the one creating a scene." "That's enough," Arthur Finch boomed, his voice startling the other passengers who were now watching the drama unfold. "Get her out of my seat or I'll have your job, both of you." That was the final push. Fear, prejudice, and a complete dereliction of duty coalesced. David Chen straightened up, his face a grim mask. "Ma'am, this is your final warning. Relocate to 8C or you will be removed from this aircraft." Evelyn slowly gathered her belongings. Her movements were deliberate, unhurried. The fury inside her was a white-hot, silent inferno, but her exterior was pure ice. She stood up, her 5'9" frame commanding respect even in this moment of profound disrespect. She looked David Chen directly in the eye. "You will regret this," she said, her voice a low, chilling promise. Then she turned her gaze to Arthur Finch, who was already sliding into her seat with a triumphant smirk. He didn't even meet her eye. She walked past them, head held high, ignoring the stares and whispers of the other passengers. She didn't go to seat 8C. She walked directly to the aircraft door, where the lead gate agent was standing. "I will be deplaning," she announced. The gate agent, surprised, began to stammer about the flight. Evelyn held up a hand. "You need to retrieve my checked luggage, immediately." As she stepped off the jet bridge and back into the sterile chaos of Heathrow's terminal, Evelyn pulled out her phone. The humiliation was a bitter taste in her mouth, but it was already being replaced by something else, the cold, clear focus of immense power about to be wielded. She didn't dial her assistant. She didn't dial her legal team. She dialed the direct line of Marcus Thorne, the chief financial officer of the Atherton Foundation. He answered on the second ring. "Evelyn, I thought you were in the air." "Change of plans, Marcus," she said, her voice devoid of all emotion. "Call the investment committee. I want you to immediately freeze the Series B funding tranche for the Prestige Airlines Aero Green initiative. All $500 million of it. Suspend all negotiations. Ground everything. And Marcus," she paused, watching the plane she was supposed to be on slowly push back from the gate, "draft a press release. The Atherton Foundation is re-evaluating its partnership with Prestige Airlines, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values and a failure to meet basic standards of customer decency." A stunned silence on the other end of the line. "Evelyn, what happened?" Evelyn's gaze was fixed on the retreating aircraft. They just kicked the wrong woman out of her seat. The email landed in the inbox of Julian Croft, the CEO of Prestige Airlines, at 11:42 p.m. London time. He was at a sterile corporate dinner, feigning interest in a speech about market synergy. His phone buzzed with a priority alert from his chief financial officer. The subject line was a single terrifying word: urgent. He opened it. It was a forwarded message from Marcus Thorne of the Atherton Foundation. Julian's blood ran cold as he read the clipped, ruthlessly corporate language. Effective immediately, the Atherton Foundation is placing an indefinite hold on the transfer of the $500 million Series B funding. All partnership discussions suspended, citing a fundamental misalignment of corporate values. Julian felt the floor drop out from under him. The Aero Green Initiative was more than just a project. It was the entire future of his company. It was their answer to crippling fuel costs and environmental pressure. The $500 million from Atherton wasn't just cash. It was a stamp of approval from the world's most respected philanthropic investment fund. It was the linchpin of their 5-year strategic plan. Without it, their stock would nosedive, their credit rating would be shot, and their competitors would carve them up like a holiday turkey. He excused himself from the table, his hands trembling slightly as he dialed his head of corporate relations. "Get me everything you can on our interactions with the Atherton Foundation today. Any complaints, any issues, anything at all." Then he called the airline's operations center. "I need the full passenger manifest and all incident reports for Flight 76, London to JFK, that departed about an hour ago." The information trickled in, and with it a growing sense of horror. An incident report filed by cabin supervisor David Chen detailed an uncooperative passenger in seat 2A who was relocated after a dispute. The passenger's name was listed as Evelyn Reed. A quick search brought up her profile. Dr. Evelyn Reed, CEO and founder of the Atherton Foundation. The woman personally responsible for the $500 million deal. Julian felt a wave of nausea. He stumbled into a men's room, splashing cold water on his face. This wasn't a dispute. This was a self-inflicted, catastrophic wound. He looked at the details of the report again. The seat was reassigned to a Mr. Arthur Finch. Julian's heart sank even further. Arthur Finch, a notoriously difficult, boorish man who held a significant, though not controlling, stake in the airline. He was a relic from a previous era, a constant thorn in the board's side, known for his abrasive personality and his habit of treating airline staff like his personal servants. Julian connected the dots with dawning dread. A low-level flight attendant, an ineffectual supervisor, and an arrogant shareholder had just, through a potent cocktail of incompetence, prejudice, and cowardice, cost the company $500 million. His phone rang again. It was the airline's chairman, Sir Richard Sterling, his voice crackling with aristocratic fury. "Julian, what in God's name is this Atherton news? The market opens in 6 hours. We are going to be crucified." "Richard, I'm just getting the details. It appears there was an incident on board." "An incident?" Sir Richard scoffed. "Julian, this isn't a spilled drink. This is a corporate decapitation. The press release from Atherton is already on the wire services. It's brutal. It mentions failure to meet basic standards of decency. They're framing this as a moral failing. Fix it. Fix it now." The line went dead. Julian's mind raced. He needed to get ahead of the story. He needed to speak to Evelyn Reed directly. He ordered his assistant to find her wherever she was. She was booked into the Savoy in London on an open-ended ticket, paid for by a black corporate card that could have bought the entire hotel. Meanwhile, back in the first-class cabin of Flight 76, soaring 35,000 feet over the Atlantic, the architects of the disaster were blissfully unaware. Karen, the flight attendant, was preening, feeling she had successfully managed a difficult situation and impressed a wealthy passenger. David Chen, the supervisor, was just relieved the confrontation was over and he could retreat to his paperwork. Arthur Finch, nursing a large scotch in seat 2A, felt a smug sense of satisfaction. He'd gotten what he wanted, as he always did. He saw the world as a simple hierarchy, and he was at the top. The woman, whoever she was, had been put in her place. He sent a text message to a private number, a fellow board member who shared his disdain for Julian Croft's leadership. "Created a little turbulence for Croft tonight. You'll see it in the morning. Stage is being set." He had no idea that the little turbulence he had engineered was about to become a Category 5 hurricane, and he was standing directly in its path. The sun had not yet risen over New York City, but the 50th floor boardroom of Prestige Airlines was already blazing with light and incandescent rage. An emergency virtual board meeting was in progress, the faces of its members, a gallery of grim, powerful figures from around the globe, beamed onto massive screens. At the head of the table sat Julian Croft, looking as though he hadn't slept in a year. The damage was catastrophic and immediate. Pre-market trading showed Prestige stock in a terrifying freefall, down 28%. The Atherton Foundation's press release had been picked up by every major news outlet. It was the lead story on Bloomberg and the Wall Street Journal's website. The narrative was brutal. A beloved, globally respected philanthropic organization pulling the plug on a major deal with an airline that couldn't even treat its customers with basic decency. The subtext, a whisper that was quickly growing to a roar on social media, was even worse. The hashtag #FlyingWhileBlack was trending, with Dr. Reed's name attached to it. "Explain this to me again, Julian," boomed General Harrison, a retired four-star general who sat on the board. "We lost $500 million in funding, and likely billions more in market capitalization, because 2 of your employees couldn't read a boarding pass." "It's more complicated than that, General," Julian said, his voice strained. "The supervisor's report claims Dr. Reed was being disruptive." A sharp, humorless laugh came from the screen to his left. It was Beatrice Lipton, a formidable hedge fund manager. "Oh, please, Julian, don't insult our intelligence. Dr. Evelyn Reed is famous for her composure. She once negotiated a peace treaty between 2 warring South American telecom giants, armed with nothing but a PowerPoint presentation and a cup of tea. The idea that she became disruptive over a seating arrangement is ludicrous. What really happened?" Julian took a deep breath. The other passenger was Arthur Finch. A collective groan went through the boardroom. Arthur Finch was their problem child, a walking liability. "Finch," Sir Richard Sterling muttered, his voice laced with venom. "Of course. The man is a Neanderthal in a Savile Row suit." "We have the audio from the gate agent's log," Julian continued, pressing a button. A tinny but clear recording played through the room's speakers. It was Evelyn Reed's voice, cold and precise, as she deplaned. "Retrieve my checked luggage, immediately." There was no shouting, no hysterics, just the sound of controlled, decisive anger. "This is an unmitigated disaster," Beatrice Lipton stated flatly. "A black woman, one of the most respected executives in the world, is publicly humiliated for the convenience of an arrogant white shareholder. The optics are apocalyptic." Julian's team had worked through the night. They had pulled the personnel files for Karen Miller and David Chen. Karen had 3 prior passenger complaints logged against her, all from minority passengers, all citing a dismissive and condescending attitude. They had been buried in HR. David Chen's file showed a pattern of de-escalation by capitulation. He always sided with the loudest voice in the room, regardless of who was right. "We've tried to contact Dr. Reed," Julian said, looking defeated. "Her office informed us that she is unavailable, but will have her legal counsel, Isabel Rossi, contact us in due course. Rossi is a shark. She's legendary." The door to the boardroom opened and a junior legal aide hurried in, handing Julian a tablet. His face went white as he read it. "What is it now?" Sir Richard demanded. "It's from a reporter, Liam Carter from the New York Times," Julian said, his voice barely a whisper. "He's running a story. He has an anonymous source from inside the flight crew who has confirmed the entire incident. The source alleges that the flight attendant, Karen Miller, referred to Dr. Reed as that one in a conversation with another crew member, and that Arthur Finch was heard saying, 'Some people need to learn their place.'" The room was silent, the weight of those words sucking the air out. It was no longer a story about bad customer service. It was now, irrefutably, a story about racism. "And," Julian added, feeling the last nail being hammered into his company's coffin, "Carter is also asking for comment on Arthur Finch's text messages. He has a screenshot of a text Finch sent from the plane." He read it aloud. "Created a little turbulence for Croft tonight. You'll see it in the morning. Stage is being set. The implication was horrifying. This wasn't just an entitled passenger throwing his weight around. This might have been a deliberate act of corporate sabotage, with Dr. Reed as collateral damage. Arthur Finch had been a vocal opponent of Julian Croft's leadership and the expensive Aero Green initiative. He saw it as a woke vanity project. Had he engineered this entire confrontation to tank the deal, sink the stock, and create an opening for a hostile takeover, or a vote of no confidence in the CEO? Sir Richard Sterling stood up, his knuckles white as he gripped the edge of the polished mahogany table. "Get me our legal team. Get me our PR firm. I want Miller and Chen suspended without pay, pending termination. And someone get me Arthur Finch on the line. I'm going to personally inform him that he has just become the most toxic asset this company has ever owned." The boardroom blitz was in full swing. The hunt was on. But the real power lay not in their panicked damage control, but with Dr. Evelyn Reed, who was sitting in her suite at the Savoy, calmly sipping tea and strategizing her next move with the formidable Isabel Rossi. The $500 million was just the opening salvo. The war for accountability had just begun. Isabel Rossi was a woman who moved through the world with the lethal grace of a panther. Her mind was a steel trap, and her loyalty to Evelyn Reed was absolute. She sat opposite Evelyn in the opulent London suite, a tablet in her hand displaying a web of connections that her team of investigators had assembled in less than 12 hours. "It's worse than we thought," Isabel said, her voice a low purr that belied the gravity of her words. "And much more intricate. Arthur Finch isn't just an entitled racist. He's a corporate viper." Evelyn listened, her face a mask of calm concentration. The initial sting of humiliation had been processed and converted into pure, cold fuel. "Explain." "Finch has been shorting Prestige stock for the last 3 months, Isabel stated, swiping through pages of trading data. "He's been using a series of shell corporations registered in the Cayman Islands. It's a significant position, nearly $100 million. He stood to make a fortune if the stock price collapsed." Evelyn's eyebrows raised slightly. "And our funding was the primary pillar holding up that stock price." "Exactly," Isabel confirmed. "The Aero Green deal was propping up their valuation. He knew that killing the deal would trigger the panic sell-off he needed. But he couldn't just vote against it. He'd be outvoted. So he needed to make the deal's primary backer, you, pull out." The sheer calculated malice of it was breathtaking. Arthur Finch hadn't just stumbled into a confrontation. He had likely planned it. He knew the London to JFK route was a flagship for the airline. He knew who Evelyn was. He might have even known she was on that specific flight. "How would he know I was on that flight?" Evelyn asked, voicing the question aloud. "We're digging into that," Isabel replied. "We've subpoenaed the booking records. We suspect he has a source inside the airline's executive booking department. Someone who tipped him off that the CEO of his Golden Goose was going to be in seat 2A. The pieces clicked into place. Finch saw an opportunity. He knew that by creating a public, racially charged confrontation, he could force Evelyn's hand. He gambled on the flight crew's incompetence and prejudice. He gambled on Evelyn's refusal to be disrespected. He used her dignity as a weapon against her own interests, and the interests of the airline he wanted to cripple. "The text message," Evelyn mused. "The one Liam Carter has. Stage is being set." It wasn't just a boast, it was a mission statement. "Precisely," Isabel said. "He was coordinating with someone. We believe it's another board member, Gregory Shaw. They've been trying to orchestrate a takeover for months, arguing that Julian Croft's leadership is too focused on ESG nonsense and not enough on shareholder profits." Suddenly, Evelyn saw the full picture. She hadn't just been a victim of casual racism. She had been a pawn in a high-stakes game of corporate warfare. Her humiliation was not an unfortunate byproduct. It was the central strategic objective. They had targeted her, counting on her identity and her predictable, justified reaction to being treated as a second-class citizen. The thought filled her not with more anger, but with a terrifying clarity. Her phone buzzed. It was Julian Croft, the beleaguered CEO of Prestige Airlines. She let it ring for a moment before gesturing for Isabel to answer and put it on speaker. "Dr. Reed, it's Julian Croft. I cannot begin to express how profoundly sorry I am for the abhorrent treatment you received on our aircraft." His voice was strained, heavy with desperation. "The employees involved have been suspended. We are launching a full investigation. I am personally, formally, and unreservedly apologizing to you on behalf of our entire company." Evelyn leaned forward slightly. "Mr. Croft," she said, her voice like polished steel, "your apology is noted, but you seem to be operating under the misapprehension that this was merely a customer service failure." There was a confused pause on the other end. I don't understand. Your problem, Mr. Croft, is not just a racist flight attendant. Your problem is a viper in your own boardroom. Are you aware that Arthur Finch has been actively shorting your company's stock?" The silence that followed was so profound it was almost a sound in itself. Julian Croft was clearly stunned. "And are you aware," Evelyn continued relentlessly, "that he appears to have deliberately orchestrated the incident with me in order to trigger the collapse of the Aero Green funding, from which he would profit enormously? Are you aware that your airline isn't just suffering from a PR crisis, but from an active campaign of corporate sabotage from within?" That's a very serious allegation," Croft stammered. "It is," Evelyn agreed. "And my foundation's legal team is currently compiling a dossier of evidence to that effect. Evidence we plan to share not just with your board, but with the Securities and Exchange Commission. You see, Mr. Croft, this is no longer about my seat on your airplane. This is about the fundamental integrity of your corporation. The $500 million is the least of your worries now." She hung up, leaving the CEO to grapple with the new, terrifying reality. The game had changed. This wasn't about getting an apology or getting a few employees fired. This was about tearing out the rot, root, and stem. Arthur Finch had wanted to set a stage. He had succeeded. But he was about to discover he wasn't the director of this play. He was the villain in a tragedy of his own making. Liam Carter's article in the New York Times broke at 6 a.m. Eastern Time. It was a journalistic bomb. The story led not with the customer service complaint, but with the explosive revelation of Arthur Finch's stock shorting and the text message suggesting deliberate sabotage. Dr. Evelyn Reed was no longer just a victim. She was the unflinching figure who had uncovered a massive corporate conspiracy. The story went viral on a scale that dwarfed the initial hashtag. It was a perfect storm of compelling narratives, racial injustice, corporate greed, and a powerful woman refusing to be silenced. Every major network picked it up. Financial analysts who had initially clucked their tongues at a simple PR blunder were now talking about market manipulation, shareholder fraud, and potential SEC investigations. Prestige Airlines was no longer just in trouble. It was radioactive. The first domino to fall was the most obvious. Julian Croft, armed with the information from Evelyn and the public damnation from the Times article, convened another emergency board meeting. This time there was no debate. Arthur Finch was summarily and brutally removed from all board committees. The company issued a public statement condemning his actions, announcing a full internal investigation, and stating their complete cooperation with any and all regulatory bodies. It was a corporate excommunication, performed in the full glare of the public eye. But the karma for the smaller players was just as swift and merciless. Karen Miller, the flight attendant, was at home when her phone started exploding with messages. Her name, though not initially in the press, had been leaked onto social media platforms. Her photo, culled from her own public Facebook page, was everywhere. She was the face of Airline Karen. She received an email from Prestige HR, informing her that her employment was terminated, effective immediately for gross misconduct and violation of company policy. When she tried to log into her employee portal to check her benefits, her access was already denied. She was a pariah. Her dream of a glamorous life flying to exotic locations was over, replaced by a digital ghost of public hatred that would follow her for the rest of her life. David Chen, the supervisor, received a similar email. His termination cited a catastrophic failure of judgment and inability to perform core duties of conflict resolution and passenger safety. He sat in his small apartment, rereading the email, the words blurring through his tears. He had spent 15 years climbing the ladder at Prestige, always keeping his head down, always avoiding trouble. In one moment of cowardice, he had sided with the bully, and it had cost him everything. He wasn't just unemployed, he was unemployable. His name was now synonymous with spinelessness. The public pressure was relentless. Other passengers from Flight 76 came forward, confirming Dr. Reed's version of events. One businessman in seat 3B gave a statement to CNN, saying, "She was the epitome of grace. They treated her like a criminal for no reason. The man who took her seat was loud and obnoxious. The whole thing was disgusting." Prestige Airlines was in a full-blown tailspin. Their stock had been halted from trading after dropping another 15%. Other corporate partners, spooked by the Atherton Foundation's move and the toxic publicity, began to publicly announce they were reviewing their relationships with the airline. The Aero Green initiative was not just dead. Its memory was now a testament to the airline's spectacular self-destruction. In London, Evelyn watched the news reports from her suite. There was no sense of triumph, only a grim satisfaction, like a surgeon who had successfully removed a tumor but was still surveying the damage left behind. "They're cleaning house," Isabel noted, scrolling through the news alerts. "Miller and Chen are gone. Finch is out. Croft is practically prostrating himself in every interview." "They're cutting off the gangrenous limbs," Evelyn corrected her. "But the infection is still in the bloodstream. The culture that allowed a Karen Miller and a David Chen to think their behavior was acceptable is still there. The system that allowed an Arthur Finch to fester in their boardroom is still in place." Evelyn knew that firing a few people and making a public apology was the easy part. It was crisis management 101. The real change, the real justice would be far more difficult to achieve and far more painful for Prestige Airlines. Her phone rang. It was Sir Richard Sterling, the chairman of Prestige's board. "Dr. Reed," he began, his voice humbled and weary. "On behalf of the board, I would like to offer our most sincere, abject apology. What you endured is inexcusable. We have taken swift action. We have terminated the employees responsible and ejected Mr. Finch. I am hoping, I am praying, that we might find a path forward, to discuss restoring the funding, to salvage our partnership." Evelyn let the silence hang for a moment. "Sir Richard," she finally said, her voice cool and measured, "the funding is not on the table. That door is closed. But if you are truly interested in a path forward, it will not be one of discussion. It will be one of action. My team will be sending you a list of non-negotiable terms. They will be extensive. They will be expensive. And they will fundamentally change the way you do business. This is not a negotiation. It is your company's penance. You will accept them in their entirety, or the Atherton Foundation will use its considerable influence to ensure that every one of our partners and allies divests from Prestige Airlines. Have I made myself clear?" Sir Richard, one of the most powerful men in British business, sounded like a chastened schoolboy. "Yes, Dr. Reed, crystal clear." The firestorm was burning, but Evelyn was now controlling the flames. She wasn't just going to get justice for herself. She was going to use the power they had forced her to wield to rebuild the entire institution. For Arthur Finch, the initial shockwave of the New York Times article was an annoyance, a problem to be managed. He had weathered scandals before, hostile takeover battles, messy divorces, accusations of market bullying. He believed, with the unshakable faith of the chronically entitled, that this too would pass. He would deploy his lawyers, lean on his allies, and this tempest stirred up by some overly sensitive woman would blow over. He was still Arthur Finch. The world still bent to his will. He was in his home office, a cavernous room of dark wood and priceless antiques overlooking Central Park, pouring himself a Macallan 25 when the call came. The caller ID read Sir Richard Sterling. "Richard," Finch began, a belligerent confidence still in his voice. About time you called. You need to get that hysteric of a CEO, Croft, under control. He's letting this ridiculous situation spiral. Shut up, Arthur. The voice on the other end was not that of a colleague. It was glacial, devoid of warmth or familiarity. It was the voice of a judge passing sentence. Just for a moment, I want you to close your mouth and listen. The board has convened. We have voted. The vote was unanimous. You are, as of this second, removed from all board committees at Prestige Airlines. You are stripped of all privileges and access. Your corporate credentials have already been deactivated. Finch felt a jolt, the expensive scotch suddenly tasting like acid. You can't do that. You don't have the votes. We have them. Sir Richard cut in, his voice like chipping ice. When presented with a choice between loyalty to a saboteur and the survival of the company, the board found the decision remarkably simple. We have also passed a resolution to formally censure you and have provided the full record of your text messages along with our deepest concerns about your trading activity to the Securities and Exchange Commission. You're not just out, Arthur. You're a person of interest in a federal investigation that we, your former colleagues, have just instigated. Finch was speechless, his mind struggling to process the speed and totality of this betrayal. Richard, we've known each other for 30 years, and in 30 years I never thought you were stupid, Sir Richard replied, the final twist of the knife. You lit a fire on our flagship aircraft to collect the insurance money, metaphorically speaking. You used a woman of Dr. Evelyn Reed's stature as your kindling, and now the entire forest is burning. You are a pariah, Arthur, an arsonist, and we are cutting you out before you can do any more damage. Do not contact me again. Do not contact anyone on this board. A formal notice from our legal counsel is already on its way to your lawyer. Goodbye. The line went dead. Finch stood there, the phone still pressed to his ear, the silence in the room roaring. The foundation of his world had just cracked. He immediately dialed his closest ally, his co-conspirator, Gregory Shaw. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again. Voicemail. A text message came through a minute later from a number he didn't recognize. This is Gregory Shaw's attorney. My client has instructed me to inform you that he will not be communicating with you. All future contact must go through my office. The cold dread began to seep into his bones. This was a coordinated, systematic excommunication. The herd was cutting him out, leaving him for the wolves. That evening, seeking the comforting familiarity of his power, he went to the Olympus Club, a century-old institution where titans of industry gathered to drink and affirm their dominion over the lesser world. As he walked in, the usual boisterous greetings and backslapping camaraderie were absent. A sudden awkward quiet fell over the main lounge. Men he'd shared multi-million-dollar deals and hunting trips with suddenly found the pattern on the carpet intensely fascinating. He strode to the bar, his face a mask of defiance. Before he could order, the club's manager, a man who had scraped and bowed to him for 2 decades, approached, his face a picture of polite regret. Mr. Finch, a word if I may, he murmured, guiding him to a small alcove. Sir, the Board of Governors had an emergency meeting this afternoon. In light of the unfortunate news reports, they have voted to suspend your membership, pending a full review. Suspend my membership? Finch hissed, his voice a venomous whisper. My father helped build this club. I understand, sir, the manager said, refusing to meet his eyes. But the club's reputation, the other members, they felt it was a necessary step. I must ask you to leave. Being cast out from Prestige was a business problem. Being abandoned by his allies was a betrayal. But this was a public shaming. He walked out of the club, the heavy oak doors closing behind him like a mausoleum. For the first time, he felt the icy touch of genuine fear. When he returned home, the final pillar of his life was preparing to fall. His wife, Eleonora, was in her dressing room, overseeing the packing of several Louis Vuitton trunks. She was a woman carved from marble, beautiful and hard, who had married his portfolio, not his personality. What the hell is this? He demanded. She didn't turn around, instead pointing a manicured finger at a particular gown. "Careful with that one, Maria. It's couture." She finally turned to face him, her expression as cool and appraised as if she were looking at a stalk that had just fallen off a cliff. "I'm going to our place in Gstaad. My lawyers will be in touch with your lawyers on Monday. The petition for divorce will cite irreconcilable differences." "Divorce? After 25 years? You're leaving me now?" The desperation in his voice sounded pathetic, even to himself. Eleonora gave a small, cruel laugh. "Arthur, please, don't be naive. I have a brand to maintain. The Finch name is now toxic. It's associated with fraud and racism. I will not be dragged down into the gutter with you. Our marriage was a partnership, a merger of assets. Your primary asset, your power and reputation, has been leveraged to zero. The partnership is hereby dissolved." She picked up a jewelry box. "I'm taking what's mine. The lawyers can fight over the rest, assuming the federal government doesn't take it all first." The federal government. The words hung in the air. The next morning it became a terrifying reality. At 5:30 a.m., as the city was still cloaked in a gray dawn, a fleet of black government SUVs descended on their block. Federal agents, clad in windbreakers with SEC enforcement and FBI emblazoned on the back, swarmed his building. The raid was quiet, professional, and utterly violating. Finch was woken not by a shout, but by a firm knock and the sight of an agent standing at his bedroom door, presenting a warrant. They moved through his home, his life, with detached efficiency. They cataloged everything. They took his computers, his phones, every file from his office. They even took the hard drive from the smart refrigerator. He stood by, helpless in his silk pajamas, as these strangers dismantled his existence piece by piece. The worst part was their politeness. They didn't yell or break things. They simply erased him with calm, bureaucratic precision. Isabel Rossi's dossier had given them the perfect roadmap. They weren't on a fishing expedition. They were following a detailed map to buried treasure. They quickly found the nervous accountant in one of Finch's shell corporations. Faced with the choice between loyalty to a falling titan and 5 years in a federal prison, the accountant sang like a canary. He provided encrypted ledgers and secret transaction logs that detailed not just the prestige short, but a dozen other instances of insider trading and market manipulation stretching back over a decade. The case against Arthur Finch went from strong to ironclad. 2 weeks later, the final act played out. Arthur was in his lawyer's office, a high-priced suite of glass and steel that suddenly felt like a cage. His lawyer was outlining a grim reality of pleas and sentencing guidelines when 2 FBI agents walked in. "Arthur Finch," the lead agent said, his voice flat. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit securities fraud, wire fraud, and market manipulation." There was no struggle. The fight was gone. The defiance had evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out shell of a man. The agents cuffed his hands behind his back, the cold steel a shocking final indignity. The perp walk from the office building to the waiting car was a gauntlet of flashing cameras and shouted questions. He kept his face down, a futile attempt to hide from the global humiliation he had once so cavalierly inflicted on others. At his arraignment, the transformation was complete. The man who wore his power like a tailored suit now stood before a federal magistrate in a wrinkled, off-the-rack garment his lawyer had provided. The prosecutor, a sharp young woman with eyes that missed nothing, read the charges in a clear, steady voice. Each count was another shovel of dirt on his coffin. "The government contends that Mr. Finch represents a significant flight risk and has access to undeclared offshore funds," the prosecutor stated. "We request bail be set at $50 million. Finch's lawyer argued, of course, but it was hopeless. The judge agreed. Bail is set at $50 million, secured by cash or bond. Finch looked at his lawyer, a flicker of the old arrogance returning, expecting him to handle it. The lawyer just shook his head slowly. "Arthur," he whispered, "we can't. The asset freeze is total. Every account, every property, every stock, it's all locked. You don't have $50,000 right now, let alone $50 million. And in that drab, sterile courtroom, the full weight of his ruin finally crushed him. He had tried to take a woman's seat, a small kingdom of leather and privilege just a few feet wide. In return, the world had taken everything from him. His company, his allies, his friends, his wife, his fortune, and now his freedom. The architect of a petty, malicious drama had designed his own grand, tragic downfall, and he would now have a very long time, in a very small room, to reflect on his creation. While Arthur Finch's gilded world was being dismantled by federal investigators, the document that would decide the fate of Prestige Airlines arrived not with the thunder of a lawsuit, but with the chilling quiet of an executioner's order. It was delivered via a secure courier to the desks of CEO Julian Croft and Chairman Sir Richard Sterling. It wasn't a sheaf of legal papers. It was a single 10-page document, bound in the simple, elegant dark blue of the Atherton Foundation. The title on the cover page read, "Terms for Remediation and Continued Corporate Viability." There was no room for negotiation in that title. It was a roadmap to survival, and the toll booths along the way were non-negotiable. Julian and Sir Richard read it together in the chairman's soundproofed office, a grim silence punctuated only by the turning of a page. The air, usually thick with the scent of leather and accomplishment, now felt suffocating, heavy with the weight of their company's sins. Each term, laid out by Evelyn Reed and her formidable counsel, Isabel Rossi, was a masterfully crafted blow to the airline's pride and its balance sheet, but also a precisely engineered tool for rebuilding. The emergency board meeting convened to discuss the terms was a bloodbath. The remaining members, stripped of the toxic influence of Arthur Finch but still steeped in a culture of old-world corporate entitlement, were aghast. $100 million? For a foundation? Sputtered a portly board member named Thomas Carlyle, his face crimson. This isn't a settlement, it's extortion. We're the victims of a rogue shareholder and she's punishing the entire company. She wants us to fire 3 more board members, including Gregory? Another member exclaimed, looking at Gregory Shaw, who sat pale and tight-lipped at the end of the table. She has no right to dictate the composition of this board. Gregory Shaw finally spoke, his voice dripping with venom. This is a corporate takeover in all but name. She was a pawn in Finch's game, and now she's acting like a queen. We should fight this. We release all the information on Finch's manipulation, frame him as the sole villain, and tell Dr. Reed and her terms to go to hell. For a moment, a dangerous murmur of agreement rippled through the room. It was the defiant roar of a wounded beast, the instinct to fight rather than submit. But Sir Richard Sterling slammed his palm on the mahogany table, the sound cracking like a whip. "Silence," he commanded, his voice raw with a fury they had not seen in years. "Fighter? With what? Our stock is worthless. Our brand is a synonym for racism. The Atherton Foundation's partners, which include the pension funds that hold 1/3 of our institutional shares, have already put us on notice. If we tell her to go to hell, she will simply buy the company at a fire sale price and do all of this anyway. Only we won't have jobs. We are not the victims here. We were the hosts of a disease we refused to treat, and Dr. Reed is the surgeon holding the scalpel. We will either lie on the table and let her cut, or we will die." Julian Croft, looking exhausted but resolute, stood to back him up. "Thomas, you call it extortion. She calls it penance. The market, our customers, and our remaining partners will call it the bare minimum for accountability. The $100 million is less than the market capitalization we lost in a single day. The board changes are necessary to restore confidence. The training," he paused, looking each member in the eye, "is something we should have done a decade ago. We don't have a choice between accepting these terms and the old way of doing business. The old way is a smoking crater. Our only choice is between this and bankruptcy. I vote to accept. Every single word." The fight went out of them. One by one they saw the cold, hard logic. They were broken, and Evelyn Reed was offering them the only blueprint for putting the pieces back together. The vote was nearly unanimous. Gregory Shaw abstained, his face a mask of cold fury, and tendered his resignation an hour later. The implementation was a brutal, humbling, and transformative process. The first check written was for $100 million, transferred to a trust that would fund the Atherton Initiative for Equity in Travel. Evelyn's team, led by Isabel Rossi, meticulously vetted candidates for its board, selecting a diverse group of civil rights leaders, academics, and retired ethical executives from the hospitality sector. Its first act was to commission a wide-ranging, industry-wide study on customer-facing bias, ensuring the problem at Prestige would now be used to heal the entire sector. Next came the overhaul of training. Prestige's old program, a relic from the 1990s, consisted of a 30-minute video of smiling actors and a multiple-choice quiz on beverage service. It was replaced by a mandatory 3-day immersive workshop designed by the nation's leading DEI consultancy. Resistance from veteran employees was fierce. "I've been flying for 30 years, a senior captain complained in an early session. "I treat everyone the same. I don't need to be lectured on microaggressions by some PhD who's never dealt with a delayed flight and 200 angry passengers." The facilitator, a calm, unflappable woman named Dr. Anjali Sharma, nodded. "I appreciate your experience, Captain. So let's use it. Can you recall a time a white male passenger was loud and demanding? How was he described by the crew later?" "Assertive," the captain grumbled. "Maybe difficult." "And a black woman who did the same?" Dr. Sharma pressed gently. The captain's face tightened as he recalled years of post-flight debriefs. The words came to his lips before he could stop them. Aggressive, angry. He fell silent, the distinction, so obvious now that it was spoken aloud, hanging in the air. For the first time, he understood what implicit bias actually meant. It wasn't about being a bad person. It was about a deeply ingrained, unexamined prejudice. The sessions were filled with these painful, revelatory moments. Many employees quit. The airline let them go. It was a painful purge, but necessary. The Independent Passenger Review Board was perhaps the most radical change. Composed of retired judges, consumer advocates, and ethicists, it operated outside the corporate chain of command. Its first major case involved a family whose wheelchair-bound son's custom chair had been damaged by baggage handlers. The airline's initial offer was a standard, paltry $500 voucher. The family appealed. The board reviewed the case, heard testimony about the boy's distress and the chair's $15,000 replacement cost, and ordered Prestige to pay for the new chair in full, issue a public apology to the family from the head of baggage services, and pay an additional $20,000 in damages for emotional distress. The ruling sent a shockwave through the company. The era of dismissing passenger complaints with automated emails and worthless vouchers was over. Real accountability had arrived. The public atonement campaign was Julian Croft's personal crucible. There were no soaring jets or happy customers in these commercials. It was just him, on a simple stool against a gray backdrop. He looked directly into the camera, his voice devoid of spin. "We failed," he said in the opening of the first ad. "We failed Dr. Evelyn Reed, and in doing so, we failed the values we claim to uphold. An apology is not enough. So today, I want to tell you not what we're going to do, but what we have already done." He then detailed in stark, simple terms the creation of the foundation, the new training, and the independent review board. He ended by saying, "We are not asking for your trust. We are committing to earning it back, one flight at a time." The campaign was brutally honest and deeply uncomfortable, and it was the most effective advertising the airline had ever done. Amidst this corporate rebirth, the final personal notes of karma played out. Karen Miller, the flight attendant, found herself in a state of social and professional exile. After being fired, she attempted to get a job with a rival airline, but her name was now infamous. She moved back to her small hometown in Ohio, but her notoriety followed her. One afternoon, she was in the local supermarket when she heard a mother whisper to her child, "See her? That's the lady from the news. Be nice to people or you'll end up like her." The casual cruelty of it broke her. She was no longer a person. She was a cautionary tale, forever defined by a single ugly choice. David Chen, the supervisor, suffered a quieter but equally devastating fate. He was consumed by a gnawing shame. His career was over, but worse, he had lost his own self-respect. He had always seen himself as a good man, a fair man, but under pressure he had folded. He had protected the aggressor and punished the victim. He replayed the moment in his head 1,000 times, imagining a different outcome where he stood up to Arthur Finch and defended Evelyn Reed. That man, the man he could have been, haunted him. He eventually took a night job as a security guard at a warehouse, the quiet hours a long, lonely penance for his moment of profound weakness. 6 months after the incident on Flight 76, the Atherton Initiative for Equity in Travel held its inaugural gala. It wasn't a celebration, but a sober call to action for the entire industry. Julian Croft was a guest speaker, his speech humble and forward-looking. Sir Richard Sterling was in the audience, looking older, wiser, and more somber. Dr. Evelyn Reed was there, though she did not take the stage. She sat at a quiet table, observing the event she had willed into existence. She watched as leaders from other airlines spoke to Julian, not with scorn, but with a grudging respect, asking about the new training programs and the independent review board. She saw the first grant from the foundation being awarded to a non-profit that helped minority students pursue careers in aviation. This was the final, most important consequence. It had started with an act of personal humiliation, an attempt to make one powerful woman feel small. But Evelyn Reed had refused to let the story be about her. She had absorbed the poison of that moment and transformed it into an antidote for the entire system. Her retaliation was not a wildfire of revenge that burned everything to the ground. It was a controlled burn, clearing out the rot and the underbrush so that something new, something stronger and more equitable, could grow in its place. She had been kicked out of her seat, but in the end, she had rebuilt the entire airplane, ensuring its foundation was no longer built on privilege and prejudice, but on the solid bedrock of dignity. And in the quiet hum of the room, filled with the promise of a better future, she found her justice. The story of Dr. Evelyn Reed and Prestige Airlines is more than just a shocking tale of corporate drama. It's a powerful lesson in consequences. It shows how one act of prejudice, born from arrogance and enabled by cowardice, can unravel an entire institution. But more importantly, it shows the immense power of standing your ground, of knowing your worth, and of using your influence not just to punish, but to enact meaningful, lasting change. The karma that unfolded wasn't magic. It was the direct result of a brilliant, resolute woman who refused to be victimized and instead became an agent of justice. This story is a stark reminder that the battle for respect and equality is fought every day, in boardrooms, in classrooms, and yes, even in the first-class cabins of airplanes. If you found this story compelling and believe in the power of accountability, please hit that like button, share this video to spread the message, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas where karma always delivers the final verdict. Let us know in the comments what you think about Dr. Reed's actions. Was it revenge or was it justice?